Whenever we're having a discussion about the enemies from within that Donald Trump refers to, he often likes to point the finger at Democrats when really we need to be looking at the people that are in and around his party and his regime. And no discussion of the enemies within can be complete without talking about the billionaire funders that back his campaign and his regime. At the top of that list are Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. And when we think about Elon Musk, we have to understand that this is somebody who was born and bred in apartheid era South Africa. And his family lineage has deep ties and history to the Nazi regime. In fact, when you look at his grandfather and even his father, they had deep affinity for apartheid era South Africa and Nazi policies. So when you look at his obsession with the great replacement theory and all of these eugenics based reasoning, it has its roots in his Nazi and apartheid era upbringing. And while Elon has apparently had some sort of falling out with Trump, which I don't necessarily buy, it's important to consider that the vast majority of billionaire funders that are surrounding the Trump campaign all have a vested interest in advancing the white supremacist core that is at the heart of the Trump regime. And when we're talking about white supremacy and evil billionaires, no discussion of that can be complete without talking about Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is the right wing backer of so many dystopian ideas. And he paints himself as a libertarian, although what he says is libertarian ideals is a complete bastardization of what libertarianism stands for. Think about what Peter Thiel wants. Here's Peter Thiel talking about what the next series of great men are going to look like and how he believes society needs to be restructured.
The basic idea was that we could never win an election on getting certain things because we were in such a small minority. But maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through a technological means. And this is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics.
Any discussion of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk needs to include the damage that they've already done to the US in the short amount of time that they've been involved with this regime. We all know all of the things that happened with Doge. And what's interesting about the activities that Doge has been involved with, they're operating under the cover of government efficiency. What's actually happened is that Doge has embedded all sorts of backdoors and Trojan horses and who knows what else within key systems across all of government. And this works hand in hand with the overarching plan that Peter Thiel has in terms of his vision for a technocratic, elite led future. One of the stated objectives that Thiel has is to leverage technology and leverage the power of Silicon Valley and all of his billionaire tech bro buddies to reform society into something that is more palatable to the interests of the elite. Now, they have gone forward over the last couple of decades under the banner of being supposed libertarians, when the reality of it is that these people are using libertarianism as a cover for being some of the worst dictators and oligarchs in the history of man. What they are proposing is not new. It is the consolidation of power and wealth in the hands of the very few, and everyone else is cannon fodder. And when you think about what Peter Thiel really wants, there's a reason why a number of his companies are deeply involved in various government contracts and efforts, because this is all part of a bigger plan to own all of the data of every single individual in the US and around the globe. And once this data is compiled and organized, it creates a global web of surveillance that the billionaire tech oligarchs can control and dictate the lives of every citizen that is on the planet. When you look at the influence of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk within this regime, you see it take shape in terms of the executive orders that have been issued. And one particular executive order was recently signed by Trump, which mandated that all government agencies should be doing whatever they can with the aid of Palantir to remove data silos across the entire face of government. And what this does is that it centralizes all of that data into Palantir's databases. And once there, anybody and everybody can do whatever they want with it to advance the interests of the surveillance state that they're going for. So when you think about the inner circle of evil that is around this administration, and particularly the billionaires that are involved, and particularly the PayPal mafia, the things that they've already done are going to take decades to unwind. And that is why, when this is resolved, there is no other alternative than to make sure the Elon Musk, the Peter Thiels, the Mark Andreessens, and everybody else, the entire billionaire class that have contributed to this Nazi regime, receive a reckoning that is directly proportional to the damage that they've caused. If these people are not in front of a Nuremberg style trial, it is going to be a massive problem. Peter Thiel, the PayPal mafia, and all of the billionaires that are surrounding the Trump administration, they all have their ideological base being formed by a guy named Curtis Yarvin. And Curtis Yarvin is a blogger and Silicon Valley influencer who has been, for the better part of the last 10 years, talking about the dark Enlightenment. And his argument is that democracy is a failed idea. And there needs to be a consolidation of forces amongst the elite, where the elite rule in very much the same way that a CEO runs the company. And basically, these quote unquote great men exert the level of influence necessary to run the country and run the world in a way that feeds the economic engine for the elites. That is Curtis Yarvin's philosophy. And all of these Silicon Valley billionaires and millionaires have latched onto it and are obviously using Donald Trump as their vessel to achieve those ends. When you look at some of the investments that these billionaires have wrapped themselves up in, they are actively working at creating these quote unquote freedom cities and freedom zones all around the world. Some of them are being launched in the US, but you have places like El Salvador and Guatemala, which have enclaves of these societies being propped up by these billionaires in an effort to topple those governments and create states where there are no rules other than what these billionaires want to set. And Peter Thiel has his fingers in all of them. And when you think about the shady connections of Peter Thiel, it is interesting to note that Peter Thiel has invested in some of the ventures that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in, and the Epstein estate is reaping the benefits even today after those Peter Thiel investments. So when you think about Peter Thiel as the godfather of the Republican regime, he and his other billionaire friends all have similar rootings in apartheid era South Africa and Nazi ideology. In fact, when you look at the hangers on in the Trump administration, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are obviously get the ones that get all the headlines. These two have deep roots in South African apartheid era ideology. In fact, Peter Thiel grew up in a town that celebrated Hitler's birthday well into the post World War II era, into the 70s. And that gives you an idea of this person's wiring. And when you think about his conversations about how he views minorities and DEI and the global South and the global majority, you start getting to understand the picture that he has in his mind about what the ideal society looks like. It's largely white. It's almost completely made up of elites, and everybody else are just cogs in the machine designed to feed their wealth. But Peter Thiel is not alone when you look at the billionaire enemies within that are operating in plain sight. David Sachs is another PayPal who is deeply tied to the Trump administration, and shocker, another South African influenced billionaire who is working on creating his utopian society of elites. Rolf Botha, who is the son of the last apartheid era South African prime minister, Peak Botha, is also deeply involved in the PayPal mafia and associated with the Trump regime. And these are all people with deep roots in the apartheid era South African roots that these billionaires have. But it's not just these people, these billionaires that are subverting democracy. You have other billionaires that are in and around the Trump administration that also have similar ideologies. In fact, when you look at the Trump cabinet, this is the wealthiest cabinet in the history of the US, made up of multimillionaires and billionaires that are setting policy that stomps out the middle class and lower class in order to fund their pet projects and their corruption.